There is a specific kind of quiet that comes from a show you have already finished. You know how it ends. You know the town, the two children, the great creaking house full of fake attractions and real danger, and because you know it, you can let it wash over you without holding on. The voices arrive before the pictures do. Grunkle Stan grumbling somewhere in the next room, Mabel laughing at nothing, Dipper narrating his own worry in that careful, older voice. When you are half awake, drifting at the edge of sleep, those sounds do not ask anything of you. They simply keep the room from being silent. Gravity Falls was built for the dark of summer, for the long evenings when the light lasts and the mystery hums underneath, and it turns out to be built just as well for the dark of a bedroom, when the mystery has been solved and only the warmth remains. Tonight the plan is simple. Every episode of the series, in order of how good it is, from the weakest to the very best, spoken about slowly and thought about honestly. What makes one episode land and another merely pass the time? Why a season that critics scored at 100% still contains an episode the audience quietly ranked last. The whole run, ranked and unhurried, laid end to end for you to fall asleep inside. Welcome to Pine Hat. This is a place for the shows you have loved long enough to sleep to, examined with the seriousness they were always secretly owed, and the calm you need at this hour. There is nothing here you have to follow. If you drift off during the low-rated ones and wake near the top of the list, that is fine. The ranking will carry you either way. So find the position you keep for the whole night. Let the light go low. Settle in and let the town of Gravity Falls fill the quiet while you fall asleep. Before any ranking can begin, there is a question worth sitting with, and the question is a simple one. What makes one episode of a show better than another? It sounds obvious until you try to answer it, and then it dissolves into a handful of competing instincts. Mystery, comedy, mythology, character work, the strange, unmeasurable thing we call rewatchability, the pull that makes you return to something you have already seen many times over. These are the 5 lenses this countdown will hold up to each episode, and the reason they are the right lenses is that the person who built the series was thinking in almost exactly those terms while he built it. Alex Hirsch, who created Gravity Falls, once described the central task of writing any given episode as finding what he called a marriage, not a supernatural plot on its own, and not a character conflict on its own, but the union of the two. He called that union the biggest challenge of the whole show. Think about what that means for a ranking like this one. It means the mystery and the mythology were never supposed to stand apart from the character work. They were supposed to be welded together, so that the monster of the week and the ache inside a character were, ideally, the same problem wearing 2 faces. Hirsch was candid about the failure state, too, the version of the series he was working to avoid. He described the danger of an episode drifting into what he called a standard kids' cartoon, the kind where things elevate for no reason until a twist arrives to justify the noise. That phrase is a useful measuring stick. When he judged an episode, he applied 2 tests, and those tests were whether the tension had been built honestly and whether the characters were carrying a real story underneath the spectacle. A weak episode, in his framing, was one where the escalation had nothing beneath it. A strong one earned its rising stakes. So as this list moves, keep that distinction close. An episode can be loud and strange and still be hollow. The best ones are strange because someone inside them wants something badly. Comedy sits among the criteria for a reason that goes back to the room where the series was assembled. When Hirsch was hiring his writing staff, the team read roughly 100 sample scripts. And the ones they chose, the 3 writers they brought on, were chosen on a single instinct. Their scripts made him laugh, not their command of plot structure, not their knowledge of the mythology that had not fully been invented yet, but whether the pages were funny on the page. So when this ranking weighs comedy, it is weighing something the show was explicitly built to protect. The laughter was load-bearing. It was, in a real sense, the hiring criterion. There is a natural worry with any ranking, which is that one person's taste is simply being dressed up as judgment. It is worth grounding that worry against the outside record. Gravity Falls holds a 100% critic approval score on Rotten Tomatoes for both of its seasons, based on 12 reviews for the first and 8 for the second. That is a rare thing, and it tells you the floor of this show sits unusually high. There are, in other words, very few genuinely bad episodes to rank. The countdown is not sorting good from bad, it is sorting good from extraordinary, and that is a harder and more interesting problem. At the very top of that problem sits a single data point that is hard to ignore. The Season 2 episode titled Not What He Seems carries an average user rating of 9.8 out of 10 on IMDb, the highest of any episode in the series. Other videos on this channel have already told the story of what happens inside that episode, so this ranking will not retell it the same way. What matters here, at the outset, is what that number represents. It is the point where all 5 criteria converge at once. The mystery pays off, the mythology cracks open, the characters are pushed to a decision that costs them something, and viewers return to it again and again. Hold it in mind as a kind of summit. Everything else on this list will be measured against how close it comes to that same convergence. Every show that people love enough to argue about eventually gets ranked against itself, and Gravity Falls is no exception. Fans who can recite whole episodes from memory have also spent years privately deciding which ones they would skip on a rewatch, and the aggregators have made those private judgments public. ScreenRant compiled the series episodes by their IMDb ratings, and when you read that list from the bottom up, a small cluster of installments keeps appearing where the celebrated ones do not. These are not failures in any real sense. A show this consistent does not produce genuine disasters. But the gap between its best and its least admired is where you can actually see how the machine works, and what happens when one of its gears turns a little too slowly. At the very bottom sits an episode from the first season called Boys Crazy, rated 7.2 out of 10, the lowest score in the entire run. Think about what it takes to earn that position in a series with almost no weak links. The episode builds itself around a boy band called Sev'ral, and the joke it wants to tell is a satire of boy band culture. That is the problem the critics identified. By the time the episode aired, that particular target had already been picked over for years, and the humor was described as feeling a decade too dated, as though the writers were aiming at something that had drifted out of the cultural frame long before. The series even brought in a real member of that world, the former NSYNC singer Lance Bass, to voice one of the fictional band members, which is a clever piece of casting and also a quiet confession about where the episode's imagination was living. What is strange and worth sitting with is that Boys Crazy is not lazy. It reaches for something genuinely odd underneath the satire. The members of Sev'ral turn out to be clones, manufactured and then kept as prisoners, and Mabel is the one who frees them. Read that plainly, and it is a small horror story wearing the costume of a comedy about screaming fans. It is doing what Gravity Falls almost always does, which is to hide something unsettling inside something silly. And yet the episode lands at the bottom of the ratings anyway, which tells you that a good dark idea underneath a tired surface joke does not always rescue the whole. The surface is what most people watch, and the surface here felt old. Running alongside the clones is Dipper's half of the story, and it moves in a different key entirely. He becomes convinced that Robbie has hidden a secret brainwashing message inside a song, a buried command meant to control Wendy. This is a paranoia plot, a boy certain that the thing he cannot compete with must be a trick rather than a real feeling. There is something almost too honest in it, a jealousy dressed up as investigation, and it may be part of why the episode divides people. It asks you to sit with Dipper at his least sympathetic. The show usually earns that kind of discomfort. Here, folded in beside a dated satire, it seems to have cost the episode more than it gave. Move up the list a little and the pattern shifts from dated to simply thin. 2 first-season episodes, Little Dipper and Boss Mabel, sit tied among the 10 lowest rated, each at 8.0. Boss Mabel in particular drew a sharp contemporary reaction. A recap from around that time reportedly called it a slightly dry entry, and the complaint was not about tone but about substance. The comedy was judged weak and the plot unoriginal, a story you had seen the shape of many times before it reached this version. That is a specific kind of disappointment, different from the one Boys Crazy produces. One episode felt out of time. This one felt out of ideas, a competent hour that never found the strangeness the series usually promises. Its companion at the same rating, Little Dipper, shares that quiet fate of being fine, which in a show built on wonder can read as a small letdown. The one entry from the second season in this lowest cluster is The Love God, which lands 4th from the bottom overall at 7.9. What matters about its placement is less any single flaw and more its company. By the second season, the series had deepened, its mythology had thickened, and the stakes had grown. For an episode from that later, richer stretch to fall this far down suggests that the qualities fans came to expect had already risen high enough that a merely pleasant installment now registered as a dip. The bar the series set for itself is visible precisely in where it occasionally fails to clear it. So consider what unites this small group, because it is not one failing, but a few. There is the joke that arrives too late, the plot that arrives too familiar, the episode that arrives perfectly capable, and nothing more. None of these are the crimes of a bad show. They are the ordinary weather of a very good one, the days when the writing reaches for its usual trick, and the trick does not quite catch. A brainwashing subplot that leaves its hero looking smaller than we want him. A satire pointed at a target that had already moved. A caper described by one early reviewer as bone dry. These are the moments where Gravity Falls behaves like the television it was made from, rather than like the strange and careful thing it became. And there is a gentle lesson in reading a beloved series this way, from the bottom rather than the top. The lowest rated episode of Gravity Falls still scores 7.5 out of 10. Which many other shows would treat as a high point. The floor here is where lesser series keep their ceiling. When fans point to these episodes as the weak spots, they are not describing anything broken. They are describing the narrow band of ordinariness that the rest of the show almost always escapes, and by naming it, they are really measuring how far the good episodes climbed above it. The weak points are only weak against the standard the series itself invented, and that standard, in the end, is the more interesting thing to notice. There is a particular kind of episode that fans learn to file away as skippable and bottomless pit. From the first season of Gravity Falls is often one of them. It is an anthology, a frame around a handful of loosely connected stories, and anthologies rarely carry the plot forward. Yet the episode sits comfortably in the middle of most rankings, holding an IMDb score of 8 out of 10. And the reason has nothing to do with what it advances, and everything to do with how it is built. Written by Alex Hirsch and Mike Rionda, directed by Joe Pitt and Aaron Springer, it is an episode that exists to be funny, and it understands that comedy, done with care, is its own kind of craft. The premise is almost aggressively small. Stan drives the mystery cart out to the bottomless pit, with Dipper, Mabel, and Suze along for the trip, and the plan is simply to dump things nobody wants anymore. Among the discarded items are love letters that Mabel received from Gideon Gleeful, and a box that Mabel herself describes, in effect, as holding personal and mysterious secrets. Suze, meanwhile, throws away his old shoes and a barbecue grill, the sort of clutter that accumulates in a life without anyone quite deciding to keep it. This is the entire engine of the opening. 4 people at the edge of a hole, getting rid of the past, treating an infinite void in the ground as though it were a curbside on trash day. Then a sudden windstorm arrives, and the whole group tumbles in. They fall because they are trying to hold on to Stan, who refuses to go back inside, and there is something telling in that detail. The chaos does not come from anyone doing something reckless for its own sake. It comes from stubbornness, from Stan planting himself against the weather, and from the others reaching for him rather than for safety. They go into the pit together, chasing after the one member of the group least willing to be moved. What happens next is the structural gamble of the episode. Trapped in a fall with no apparent bottom and no obvious end, the group passes the time by telling stories. This is the anthology framing made literal, and it is worth pausing on how strange and elegant the choice is. The characters are, by any reasonable measure, in danger, and the episode responds not with a rescue plot, but with the oldest human instinct there is. When you cannot control the situation, you narrate it. You fill the silence. The bottomless pit becomes a campfire, and the falling becomes the excuse for company. The first of these tales is Dipper's, and it carries the title Voice-Over. Everything about it is built around a single anxiety, which is Dipper's discomfort with his own changing voice, and the episode mines that discomfort with a comic precision that never quite tips into cruelty, even as it lets the other characters be merciless. Inside the story, Mabel, Suze, and Wendy play a version of Spin the Bottle, except that they have no bottle, and so they use Waddles the pig instead, calling the game Spin the Pig. It is a small, absurd substitution, and it does the work that good visual comedy always does. It tells you something about these characters without a line of explanation. Of course they would use the pig. Of course the pig would be treated as furniture and friend at once. The heart of Dipper's embarrassment arrives when his voice cracks. He is panicking about a snake bite, and in the middle of that panic his voice breaks. And rather than offer comfort, the others turn the sound into a techno remix. They take the single most vulnerable noise a boy can make and they loop it, layer it, set it to a beat. Weigh that as a piece of comic construction. The humiliation is not delivered by an enemy. It is delivered by his own friends and sister who love him and who cannot resist the material. That is a truer and sharper version of adolescent embarrassment than any villain could stage. Because the people doing it are the people whose opinion he cares about most. Dipper's solution is where the episode leans into its own logic. He goes to the Gravity Falls junkyard, and there Old Man McGucket gives him a sample of an experimental voice-altering formula. Dipper drinks it, and it works. His voice drops, deepens, becomes the thing he wanted. For a moment, the wish is granted, cleanly, the way wishes almost never are in this show. And here is where the comedy pivots from Dipper's problem to everyone else's reaction. Because a granted wish in Gravity Falls is rarely allowed to sit undisturbed. When Dipper returns with his new deep voice, Mabel does not celebrate. She concludes that his body has been taken over by a body-switching warlock, and she hits him with a golf club. Seuss, arriving at the same conclusion by a different route, hits him with a broom while shouting, in effect, that Dipper must be killed with fire. Consider the structure of that joke for a second. The change Dipper worked so hard to obtain is immediately read by the two people closest to him as evidence that he is no longer himself, that something has replaced him, that he must be destroyed. The formula solved the surface problem and created a deeper one, which is that the version of Dipper he wanted to be is unrecognizable to the people who know the real one. That is a genuinely sophisticated idea, folded inside a gag about a boy getting whacked with a golf club and a broom. This is what people mean, whether they know it or not, when they rank an episode like this in the middle rather than the bottom. There is no lore engine here, no secret about the town being pried open, no confrontation that reshapes the season. What there is instead is a run of jokes assembled with real understanding of the characters, each one growing out of who these people are, rather than being imposed on them. The Spin the Pig gag works because we know how the household treats Waddles. The techno remix works because we know how the group teases. The warlock beating works because we know that Mabel's first instinct toward a mystery is delight and violence in equal measure, and that Seuss will follow any theory to its most literal and flammable conclusion. And yet the episode is not entirely weightless, which is part of why it endures better than a pure throwaway would. That box of personal, mysterious secrets that Stan tosses into the pit at the very beginning turns out to matter. It is later revealed to contain the truth-telling teeth, an object that the wider mythology of the series does not forget. Journal 3, the companion text that expands so much of what the series only glances at, records that Ford Pines had previously studied the teeth and set down their powers. So an item that the episode treats as garbage, dumped without ceremony in the first minute, is quietly a thread connecting back to Ford, to his years of cataloging the strange, to the research that predates almost everything the twins uncover. The filler episode, it turns out, is smuggling a piece of the larger puzzle inside a box that Stan cannot wait to be rid of. That is a small masterstroke of placement, and it rewards the patient viewer without punishing the casual one. If you watch Bottomless Pit only for the jokes, you lose nothing. The teeth are a box tossed into a hole. But if you return to it after the series has told you who Ford is and what the journals contain, the same throwaway reads differently, because you know that the object has a history, that it was studied and recorded long before Stan decided it was trash. The episode does not stop to explain this. It simply lets the detail sit, correct and waiting, for anyone who cares to notice later. So the case for this episode is not a case about importance. It is a case about competence, which in comedy is rarer and harder than importance. By most accounts, the episode's writers built a frame that turns a survival situation into a storytelling circle. And inside that frame, Dipper's tale escalates with the discipline of a well-made short film. Every beat pays off the one before it. The voice crack sets up the remix sets up the trip to McGucket, the formula sets up the deep voice, and the deep voice sets up the golf club and the broom. Nothing is wasted, and nothing depends on knowing a single thing about the town's larger secrets to land. An episode that fans call filler still earns its middle ranking because craft is not the same as consequence. The show could have coasted here, could have filled the runtime with noise, and instead it filled it with jokes that understand their own characters. The falling never really ends within the story, and that is almost the point. Suspended in the pit, with nothing to do but talk, these people reveal themselves through the tales they choose to tell and the way they cannot help interrupting each other. It is a smaller pleasure than a season finale. It is still a real one, and it holds up. There is a particular shape the early episodes of this show keep returning to, a template so clean that you can feel the writers testing it, tightening it, learning where it bends. A rumor arrives. 2 children decide to prove it true, and the proving becomes the episode. What interests me, sorting these formula installments against one another on the quality of their mystery craft, is how differently the machine runs depending on what the mystery is actually made of. Some of these puzzles are external, a thing in the world waiting to be found. Some are internal, a question about who the person solving them is willing to become. Consider the earliest and simplest version of the formula. Dipper and Mabel hear that a monster lives at the bottom of the local lake, and rather than go fishing with Grunkle Stan, they enlist Suze to take them out on a boat expedition to prove the creature exists. That is the whole engine of it. There is a rumor, there is a body of water, there is a hypothesis, and there is a plan to test it. As mystery craft goes, this is the leanest possible construction. The question is a yes or no. The monster is real, or the monster is not, and the episode exists to travel the distance between not knowing and knowing. What the boat gives the episode is not intrigue so much as pretext, a reason to strand these 3 characters together and watch what happens. The mystery here is a container. It holds the real material, which is the friction of choosing the twins and their strange errand over the ordinary afternoon Stan wanted to share. I want you to sit with that choice for a moment, because it recurs. In almost every one of these formula episodes, the pursuit of a mystery is also a small refusal of Stan. The children slip the leash of the family in order to chase something the family does not believe in. The lake expedition is the purest example, because the alternative is stated so plainly. Fishing, together, an old man and his niece and nephew in a boat. Against that, a monster hunt. The show does not treat the choice as cruel, but it is a choice, and the mysteries in this stretch of episodes are almost always built on top of one. Then, the formula learns to fold the mystery inward, and the craft takes a step up. In the Wax Figures episode, the puzzle is no longer a creature in a lake, but a crime in the house. Someone tampers with Mabel's life-size wax statue, and the tampering prompts Dipper and Mabel to investigate, to find the culprit. Notice what has changed. This is a whodunit now, not a does it exist. A whodunit requires suspects, motive, a chain of reasoning, and so it demands more of the writers than a boat ride does. The question is no longer whether something is out there. The question is who, among the people we already know, is responsible. And that pulls the mystery off the map and into the domestic space of the show. And running alongside the investigation is Stan, mourning the loss of his own wax doppelganger. I find this detail telling about how the episode balances its weight. While the children do the detective work, the adult is given grief. Absurd grief. Grief for a copy of himself made of wax. The recent videos on this channel have spent a great deal of time on what Stan wants and what Stan hides, so I will not retell his mourning as character study. What matters here for the craft is structural. The mystery occupies the twins. The comedy occupies Stan. The episode runs 2 tracks at once, and that separation is a more sophisticated architecture than the single-track lake hunt. You can feel the formula gaining rooms. The strongest of these, on mystery craft specifically, is the Pioneer Day episode, and it is strongest because it does the thing the other 2 only gesture at. It makes the mystery historical, documentary, a puzzle with actual clues that hide inside other objects. The setup is social humiliation. During the Pioneer Day ceremony, Pacifica Northwest gives a speech about her great-great-grandfather Nathaniel Northwest, and then she tells Mabel she is too silly to volunteer, and the embarrassment lands hard. What Mabel does next is the emotional spine of the whole episode. She takes off her nacho earrings and her sweater, puts on what the episode calls a serious face, and resolves never to be silly again, so that she can prove she is capable of solving a mystery. See what that does to the craft of this episode. The mystery is not a monster, and it is not a stranger with a grudge. The mystery is bound to a wound, and the wound reshapes the person pursuing it. Mabel does not simply investigate. She tries to become a different kind of person in order to be worthy of investigating. That is a far more interesting frame than the lake, because now the solving and the self are entangled, and you cannot finish the plot without touching the character. The clues themselves are also better made. Dipper recalls a journal article claiming that Nathaniel Northwest may have been a town fraud, and the same journal contains a map marked with a triangle symbol. So the episode plants two things at once: a suspicion about the official history and a symbol that promises a hidden path. This is layered writing. The suspicion gives the hunt a motive, a reason the truth matters, and the symbol gives it a trail. Compare that to the lake, where the only clue you need is the monster itself. Here the mystery has documents, has iconography, has a history to overturn. The episode even builds surveillance into its structure, which raises the stakes of the investigation in a way the other two never bother to. Sheriff Blubbs and Deputy Durland eavesdrop on Dipper and Mabel from behind the Nathaniel Northwest statue, and they radio a dispatcher that the twins are acting suspiciously. The mystery now has watchers. The act of solving it has become something that can be observed and reported, which means the children are no longer merely curious, they are, in the eyes of the town, doing something. A lake hunt draws no such attention. A wax investigation stays inside the family. This one leaks out into the institutions of Gravity Falls, and that widening is part of why it feels like the most fully realized version of the formula. And then there is the single best piece of cluecraft in this whole stretch, the moment that, for me, settles the ranking. At the library, Dipper identifies a fire symbol on the document and wants to burn it, reasoning like a puzzle solver who has decided the answer must be dramatic. Mabel, instead, folds the document into a paper hat, and the paper hat reveals a hidden map to the Gravity Falls Museum of History. Hold that against her earlier vow. She had resolved never to be silly again, had stripped off the earrings and the sweater to prove she could solve a mystery. And the mystery is solved, at this turn, precisely by an act of silliness, by the childish instinct to fold paper into a hat rather than the serious instinct to set it on fire. The clue and the character resolve in the same gesture. That is craft. The puzzle does not merely get answered, it answers the question the episode asked about who Mabel needs to be. Around all of this, Stan runs his separate comic track again, put in the stocks after threatening the mechanic during the ceremony, then pelted with tomatoes by Gideon after he mocks the boy's outfit. Same architecture as the wax episode. The children carry the mystery, the old man carries the humiliation, and the two tracks braid without touching. But the mystery track in this episode is the richest the formula has yet produced. Because its clues hide inside objects, its history can be overturned, its investigators are watched, and its solution is inseparable from a child learning that the thing she was mocked for was the thing she needed all along. Consider what it means to call an episode purely comedic. Not the ones that break your heart, not the ones that unfold the great mystery of the town, but the ones you return to because they are simply dense with jokes, built to be watched again with nothing at stake beyond the pleasure of the watching. Gravity Falls has a handful of these, and they reward a certain kind of viewer, the one who has already learned every secret and now wants only to laugh, ranked by how many jokes they pack into a minute and by how well they survive a 5th or a 10th viewing. A small cluster rises to the top. They share a quality. Each one takes a simple, almost domestic premise and lets it multiply out of control. Begin with Double Dipper, the 7th episode of the first season, because it is a useful example of how the series manufactures comedy out of duplication. Stan throws a large party at the Mystery Shack, and the party is real, but the reason behind it is a swindle, because he charges the kids to get in, and then charges them all over again, just to let them leave. That is the engine of the whole show in a single gesture. The man who turns any gathering into a sales floor. And while he works the room, Dipper finds a strange photocopier and uses it to make clones of himself, an entire team of Dippers, all in service of the small and mortifying goal of impressing Wendy. Think about the comedic mathematics of that. One anxious boy is funny. A dozen anxious boys, all arguing with one another, each convinced he is the real one, multiplies the anxiety without diluting it. The episode carries a production detail worth holding on to, because it tells you how carefully this comedy was assembled. By most accounts, Double Dipper passed through more than one writer's hands, built out from an earlier story concept. Comedy that looks effortless is almost never the work of one hand, and here you have 3 writers building on a 4th person's premise, layering the jokes until the density feels natural. It is also the episode that first brings Pacifica Northwest, Candy Chew, and Grenda onto the screen. A party is the natural place to introduce people, and the episode uses the crowd not only for Stan's schemes, but to widen its own cast at the same time, which is part of why the episode rewards return visits. You catch first appearances you did not notice the first time. From duplication, move to escalation, which is the comedic method of Fight Fighters, the 10th episode of Season 1. The setup is again small and human. Robbie, who is Wendy's boyfriend, challenges Dipper to a battle in a video game, the sort of petty humiliation that any older rival might arrange. What follows is the show pulling its favorite trick, taking a metaphor literally. Dipper's favorite fighter, a character named Rumble McSkirmish, comes to life to defend him. For a moment, this is wish fulfillment, the fantasy of every kid who has ever wanted a champion. Then the joke turns, because Dipper loses control of him. The rescuer becomes a hazard. That reversal is where the rewatch value lives, in the way the episode promises a boy his power fantasy and then makes him responsible for the wreckage of it. The third of these comedic high points is Summerween, 12th in the first season, and its humor grows from embarrassment, which may be the most durable comedic fuel the show has. The premise starts with a single careless remark. Wendy casually mentions that trick-or-treating is for kids, and that small sentence lands on Dipper and changes his entire outlook on the holiday. You have felt the exact weight of that, the offhand comment from someone slightly older that suddenly makes a beloved thing feel childish. It then takes the feeling and gives it a body. A monster that Dipper has accidentally insulted forces the twins into a task. They must fulfill his candy quota by the end of the night or be eaten. It is a deadline comedy dressed as a horror premise, the ticking clock of every heist film transposed onto a bag of Halloween candy. And the stakes are absurd in exactly the proportion the joke needs. Notice what these 3 episodes have in common, because the pattern is the real subject here. Each begins with a mundane social pressure, the desire to impress a crush, the sting of a rival, the fear of being seen as too old. Then each externalizes that pressure into something literal and uncontrollable. A crowd of clones, a rampaging game character, a monster with a quota. The comedy is dense because 2 things run at once, the small emotional truth and the large physical chaos, and the jokes live in the gap between them. That doubled structure is also why the episodes survive rewatching. On the first pass, you follow the plot. On the later passes, you watch the emotional machinery underneath, and it holds. There is a 4th comedic mode Gravity Falls keeps in reserve, and it belongs to Stan, and it is on full display in a segment from the 6th episode of the 2nd season, in the in-universe tale called Hands Off. The framing is itself a joke about its own commercial instincts. Stan tells the story to a stranded traveler, and his purpose is to sell the man a disembodied hand, and he warns, in effect, that this may be one of his tales designed to sell my merchandise. The honesty of the warning is the punchline. He tells you he is manipulating you and then does it anyway. The tale itself is a small, tight machine of consequence. In Hands Off, Stan steals a fake gold watch from an old witch at a swap meet, a petty theft entirely in character, and he wakes the next morning to find his hands missing as a curse. The comedy here is the mismatch between the crime and the punishment. A worthless fake watch answered by supernatural disfigurement. The witch reveals that the curse can be broken only by a kiss, and Stan kisses her hand. She informs him that the kiss was supposed to be on the lips, and then the final turn arrives, because she confesses that the entire hand-stealing scheme was a ruse to get a date. Every element you took as horror was actually courtship. It is a story that rewards you for going back, because once you know the ending, the whole thing reads as a strange romance disguised as a curse. What holds these episodes together? Across 2 seasons and several different comedic engines is a refusal to let a joke sit alone. Duplication, escalation, embarrassment made physical, and the swindle that announces itself as a swindle. Each method loads the frame with more than one thing to laugh at, which is precisely what joke density means, and precisely why these are the episodes you can leave running in the dark and drift through and wake to and still find yourself somewhere funny. 2 summers begin, and the difference between them tells you almost everything about how a show learns to introduce itself. Consider the opening of Tourist Trapped, the very first episode the series aired, written by creator Alex Hirsch and directed by John Oshima. It begins with Dipper narrating, telling us that Gravity Falls, Oregon is a sleepy town, and that he and Mabel have arrived to spend the summer with their grunkle Stan. Notice how much work that single word, sleepy, is doing. It is an introduction from scratch. The premiere assumes a listener who knows nothing, and it builds the world one plain fact at a time. Here is a place. Here is why the children are in it. Here is the man they are staying with. The pacing is unhurried and it is deliberate, because a first episode cannot yet lean on anything. It has to hand you the ground before it can pull the ground away. And then, quietly, it starts to pull. The hook in Tourist Trap does not arrive because Dipper goes looking for adventure. That is the detail worth sitting with. His discovery of the hidden trapdoor and the mysterious numbered journal happens while he is hanging Mystery Shack advertising signs in the woods. He is doing a chore. He is working for Stan, doing the small, unglamorous labor of a tourist trap, and the mystery ambushes the errand. There is something honest about that construction. The show does not reward curiosity for its own sake so much as it lets the strange world intrude on ordinary life, which is a slower and more patient way to build a hook, and, in my view, a stronger one. What he finds inside the hollow metal tree deepens the tone rather than exploding it. The device is described as old-looking and electronic, with one of its two wires severed. Think about the restraint in that image. Not a treasure, not a weapon, not a glowing artifact. Something that looks used, something that looks abandoned, something that was once connected to a second thing and no longer is. That single severed wire is the whole promise of the series in miniature. It says there was more here, and someone cut it off. The premiere does not explain any of that. It simply lets the object sit and be subtly wrong. Then the episode does something that a great deal of television is afraid to do in its first outing. It closes the loop it opened. By the time the credits near, Dipper's suspicion about Norman pays off in dramatic fashion, as the boyfriend turns out to be a stack of gnomes searching for a new queen, and the twins send the whole swarm packing with a well-aimed blast from a leaf blower. The premiere seeds the series' first monster reveal inside the premiere itself. It does not merely promise that strange things will happen later. It delivers one in the same half hour, on the same afternoon it introduced the town. So the pacing has a shape you can feel. Establish the sleepy surface, let the mystery interrupt an errand, hand over one broken object as a promise, and then pay off a smaller mystery immediately so the listener trusts that the larger promises are real. That is a confident premiere disguised as a gentle one. Now hold that against Scary Oak, the Season 2 premiere, and watch how differently a show introduces itself once it no longer needs to introduce itself at all. Scary Oak opens with the Pines family trying to return to normal after the Leal Gideon incident, throwing what amounts to a welcome back party for the shack, a celebration that is promptly crashed by unwelcome guests. Everything about that opening presumes prior knowledge. It does not tell you what a sleepy town is. It does not walk you to the shack for the first time. Unlike Tourist Trapped, the Season 2 premiere opens by directly referencing a specific prior event from the first season, the Leal Gideon incident, rather than introducing the setting from scratch. The difference in strategy is total. Where the first premiere built the ground, the second premiere assumes you are already standing on it and are eager to get moving. That is the trade a returning premiere always makes, and it is worth judging honestly on its own terms. By anchoring its opening to something that already happened, Scary Oak gains speed. It does not spend a single beat on orientation. The hook is not a stranger's severed wire found during a chore. The hook is a party, a familiar victory the family is trying to enjoy, and the immediate wrongness of guests who should not be there. For a returning audience, that is a faster and more emotionally loaded start, because the celebration only means something if you remember what it cost to earn it. The pacing pays off memory instead of building understanding. It is a hook aimed at people who are already invested, and on that basis it is efficient in a way the first premiere could not afford to be. There is a cost to that efficiency, though, and it is the mirror image of the first season's patience. A premiere built on prior events is closed to a newcomer in a way that Tourist Trapped never is. The Sleepy Town opening will always let a stranger in. The Party After Gideon opening asks for a password at the door. Neither choice is wrong. They are simply two answers to two different questions. The first season had to earn your attention. The second season had already earned it and chose to spend that credit on momentum. You can see the same forward lean in what immediately follows. The second installment of Season 2, Into the Bunker, has Dipper and the gang using secret journal pages to find the author's hidden bunker, where they meet a mysterious figure from the town's lore. Set that beside the first premiere, and the contrast in altitude is clear. In Tourist Trapped, the journal is a discovery, a strange numbered book found by accident on the forest floor. By the second season, it has become a tool, something the characters use with intent to reach a hidden place and a hidden person. The object that once ambushed a chore is now the instrument of a deliberate search. That shift, from stumbling onto the mystery to hunting it down, is exactly the shift a second season needs in its opening stretch, and it explains why Scary Oak can skip the introductions entirely. The show trusts that you no longer need to be told what the journal is. You need to be shown what it can do. So the honest verdict, judged on pacing and hook strength rather than lore, is that these are two well-made openings solving opposite problems. Tourist Trapped is the stronger introduction, because introduction is its actual task, and it performs that task with a patience that lets a total stranger fall into the world through a chore and a broken wire. Scary Oak is the stronger continuation, faster and more immediately charged, because it is free to assume the world and spend its energy on momentum. The measure of the first is how gently it opens a door. The measure of the second is how little time it wastes now that the door is already open. There is a whole class of Gravity Falls episode that does not belong to the Pines twins at all, or at least not first. These are the episodes handed to the edges of the show, to Seuss, to the Northwest family, to a road trip across rival tourist traps, to a single unicorn guarding a forest. The question this chapter asks is not whether those characters have rich secrets. It is whether the episodes built around them are well made. Craft, in other words, and not backstory. And when you sort them that way, on the strength of their construction rather than the depth of their lore, they arrange themselves into a surprisingly clear order. Consider first Susan the Real Girl, an episode whose writing and directing credits are well documented among fans, and which first aired in the fall of that season. It is an episode named for Seuss, and yet the moment worth studying belongs to Mabel, and it tells you something about how confidently this show can throw away a joke that a lesser show would build an entire scene around. Mabel runs face first into the Mystery Shack gift shop's screen door and gets her braces caught on it. She is pinned there, held in place by orthodontia, and her immediate response is to scream for someone to take down her will. Think about the shape of that gag. The physical premise, the braces on the wire mesh, is already funny, and instead of resting on it, the writers escalate into the absurd territory of a dying declaration. In her panicked will she specifies that Waddles the pig should inherit all of her worldly possessions. That is a complete little comic structure, setup and escalation and punchline, delivered in the corner of an episode that is nominally about someone else entirely. The craft here is in the economy. A whole character is expressed, Mabel's melodrama and her devotion to her pig, in a throwaway that most viewers half remember. Now move to the Gulf War, or rather, let me correct the frame, because the strongest side character episode in this group is the one that hands its stage to Pacifica Northwest and her family. In that episode, during a practice dinner at Northwest Manor, floating objects attack Pacifica and her parents, and all three are forced to duck under the dining table for cover. Study the choice of setting, a practice dinner. The Northwests are so consumed by appearances that they rehearse their own meals, and the episode chooses to introduce the supernatural threat precisely there, at the site of the family's performance of wealth. The floating objects do not merely menace the household. They drive these three people, who spend the whole series above everyone, underneath their own furniture. The image of the Northwests, crouched under a table, is a piece of visual argument as much as it is a scare, and it is the kind of composition that separates an episode made with care from one that merely moves the plot forward. What follows is a small masterpiece of motivation, and it rewards slow attention. Preston Northwest decides to recruit Dipper, and the reason given is specific and strange. He sees a newspaper photo of Dipper in the middle of some earlier supernatural scuffle, and that photograph is what convinces him this boy can handle a ghost. There is real writing craft in making the recruitment turn on a piece of evidence rather than on a hunch. The Northwest do not believe in Dipper. They believe in documentation. in a picture in the paper, which is entirely in character for a family obsessed with reputation and record. And Dipper, when approached, initially refuses. He cites her past cruelty and her disdain toward the Pines family, and this matters because the writing does not pretend the earlier episodes never happened. Pacifica has been unkind. The writing remembers it. And Dipper's refusal is built on that continuity rather than on the needs of the moment. Then comes the negotiation, and here is where I would rank this episode near the top of the group on craft alone. Dipper agrees to help only after Pacifica hands over 3 invitations to the Northwest party. He requests them so that Mabel, Candy, and Grenda can attend. Look at what that single beat accomplishes. It keeps Dipper in character as someone who bargains rather than surrenders. It serves the B-plot in passing by getting the other girls into the manor. And it refuses the easy version of the story, in which the hero helps simply because helping is right. He wants something, he names it, and the price is admission for his sister and her friends. An episode that can carry its own theme, the hollowness of inherited status, while also solving its structural problem of how to move 4 characters into one location, is an episode doing several jobs at once without strain. That is the definition of craft. Set against that, the Unicorn story presents a fascinating problem, and I place it a little lower not because it is weak, but because its construction is deliberately more frustrating, which is a choice worth examining. The frame is dark. In Ford's dream, Bill Cipher appears and warns him that he cannot protect the interdimensional rift forever, the imagery turning steadily more ominous as the dream goes on. That is an ominous piece of imagery, a dream turned into a threat, a crop pressed into the shape of the thing threatening you. And out of that heavy opening the episode pivots to a quest that is almost comic by comparison. To shield the mystery shack from Bill, Ford sends Mabel to retrieve unicorn hair, because Journal 1 states that unicorn hair can only be taken by someone who is pure of heart. The gear shift from cosmic dread to a fairy tale errand is intentional, and I find it one of the more interesting tonal risks in this whole set of episodes. The reason it works, and the reason it belongs in a discussion of craft rather than of lore, is what the unicorn does with the premise. Celestabella Bethabel, described as the last of her kind, examines Mabel's heart and declares that she is not pure, refusing to give up her hair. Consider how much narrative pressure that single refusal creates. The audience has spent a season and a half being told, more or less, that Mabel is the warm one, the good one, the emotional center. The episode takes the series' own established shorthand for goodness and calls it into question using a magical creature as the instrument of doubt. The purity test is a device, and the writing uses it to poke at a character the series has mostly protected. Whether the episode fully earns that provocation is a matter of taste, and my own opinion is that it is braver than it is graceful. But bravery of construction is still construction, and it earns the story its place here. Which brings us last to the road trip, and to an episode whose craft lives almost entirely in its premise. Roadside Attraction opens with the Mystery Shack crew packing into Stan's RV for a trip across Oregon to visit rival tourist traps. And the whole excursion is framed as Stan's revenge for their yearly pranking of him. I want to sit with how efficient that opening is as a machine for generating story. A single vehicle, a defined geography, and a stated motive, which is petty and personal and entirely Stan. Revenge for being pranked every year. That motive does 2 useful things at once. It justifies the episodic, wandering structure of a road trip, because Stan has a reason to keep driving from one rival to the next. And it colors the whole enterprise with the character of the man behind the wheel. A grander premise would have needed more scaffolding. This one needs almost none, because the frame does the work. On pure craft, the opening is the strongest thing about it, and an episode that can set its entire engine running in its first minutes has already done something many episodes never manage. So the order, when you rank these on how well they are built rather than on what they reveal, comes out roughly like this. The Northwest Manor story sits at the top, because it carries theme and structure and continuity together, from the family cowering under their rehearsal dinner to the taser photograph to the traded invitations. The unicorn story follows, admired for the nerve of putting Mabel's heart on trial and for the strange leap from Bill's burning wheat field to a fairy tale errand. Suze and the Real Girl earns its place on the strength of a single perfectly shaped throwaway, a girl caught by her braces dictating a will to a pig. And the road trip rounds it out, A premise so cleanly stated that the episode is already moving before you have settled into your seat. None of these belong to Dipper and Mabel in the way the central mystery does. Each one is handed to the show's supporting cast, or to a machine like an RV, or to a creature like a unicorn. And each one, in its own way, proves that the edges of Gravity Falls were built with the same care as its center. There is a certain kind of episode that a series builds toward without quite admitting it, and when this project set out to rank every installment of Gravity Falls, the two-part close of the first season kept rising to the top of the pile. Not because it is loud, though it is, because it is the moment the show stops hinting at its own architecture and lets you see the beams. The Season 1 finale, split across Dreamscapers and Gideon Rises, earns its place near the summit of any honest ranking, and the reason has less to do with spectacle than with the quiet machinery of setup that precedes the spectacle. Consider how the first half opens its board. Gideon, the child rival who has spent the season circling the Mystery Shack, performs a ritual. What he summons is not a monster in the usual sense, but a dream demon named Bill Cipher, and the two of them strike a bargain. Bill agrees to invade Grunklestan's mind, and in return, Gideon promises to help Bill later with a favor that goes unnamed. Hold on to that unnamed favor for a moment. It does not tell you what it is. It plants a debt and walks away from it, and a series that is willing to write a check it does not yet intend to cash is a series that trusts its own future. Against that summoning, the episode places a warning, and it places it in the hands of the character least able to act on it in time. Dipper consults the third journal, the book that has been his lamp all season, and he reads 2 lines about Bill Cipher. The first tells him, in effect, not to summon the demon under any circumstances. The second tells him never to let Bill get into his mind. These are not clues to be decoded. They are instructions, stark and unambiguous, and the tension of the whole two-parter comes from the fact that by the time Dipper reads them, the summoning has already happened somewhere else, out of his sight. The show hands the audience the rulebook at the exact moment the rules are being broken. Then there is Stan, and the small, funny, deeply human way he thinks he has already won. As he locks the deed to the Mystery Shack inside his safe, he explains that the combination cannot be stolen because it lives in the one place Gideon can never reach, which is his own mind. Set that belief inside a story where a demon has just been hired to break into exactly that place. Stan believes his mind is the safest vault he owns. The episode has already told you it is the least safe vault in town. That is dramatic irony working the way it is supposed to work, not to make Stan foolish, but to make him human. A man protecting his home with the one defense that has been quietly compromised. Gideon does not wait for the supernatural to do all his work. He breaks into the shack himself to crack the safe, and Stan catches him in the act. What follows is almost comic in its ordinariness against the cosmic stakes gathering elsewhere. Stan confronts the boy, hits him with a broom, and chases him out of the house. A grown man swinging a broom at a child villain is the kind of image that keeps the series grounded even as it reaches toward the surreal. And it matters that Gideon flees rather than falls. He is not beaten, he is redirected, and the audience learns that his ambition runs deeper than a single theft. That ambition gets a face in his commercial, where he reveals what he actually wants. The plan is not merely to take the shack, but to tear it down and raise his own attraction in its place. A rival called the Tent of Telepathy. Understand the psychology in that choice. He does not want to own the thing his enemies built. He wants to erase it and replace it with a monument to himself. A villain who would demolish rather than inherit tells you something about how the series views pride, and it sets the physical stakes for everything the finale is about. Because a building can be torn down and a family can be scattered. Around these heavy movements, Dreamscapers keeps its smaller life running, and this is part of why it ranks so well. Dipper is sent to deal with a bat that has frightened Seuss in the kitchen, and he comes out of the encounter injured, the errand turning on him the way small errands do in this show. Seuss, meanwhile, sets off to investigate what the episode frames, with a straight face, as one of life's great mysteries, which is whether a person can lick his own elbow. Place that beside a demon summoning and a plot to destroy a home, and you might expect the tones to clash. They do not. The show has always insisted that the absurd and the ominous share the same rooms, and letting Seuss chase his elbow while the world tilts is not a distraction from the stakes. It is the texture that makes the stakes feel like they are happening to real people. It is Mabel and Seuss, not Dipper. who see the summoning happen. The two of them witness Gideon's ritual in secret, crouched behind a bush, and then hurry back to warn Dipper of what is coming. This is a small structural elegance worth noticing. The character holding the warnings in the journal is separated from the characters who see the threat with their own eyes, and the episode only becomes a rescue once those two halves of the knowledge meet. Information in this show is rarely complete in one head. It has to be carried, and the carrying is the plot. Once they understand that Bill's takeover can be fought from the inside, the three of them make the choice that gives the episode its name. Dipper, Mabel, and Seuss recite an incantation and enter Stan's mind themselves. There is something genuinely bold about that decision when you remember the journal's second warning, the one about never letting Bill into your mind. The children cannot keep the demon out of Stan, so instead they follow him in. They walk willingly into the exact place the book told them was most dangerous, because the alternative is to leave the man they love undefended. The show does not underline this. It simply lets the geography of the threat become the geography of the rescue. And then the first half ends without resolving. Gideon Rises opens by refusing to let you look away from the cliffhanger, replaying it directly. The Mystery Shack stands engulfed in shadow, and a wrecking ball swings into its sign. That single image, the ball striking the sign of the place the whole season has called home, is why this two-parter sits where it sits in the ranking. A season finale has to convince you that the world it built could actually break, and Gravity Falls chose to open its second half not with reassurance, but with the sight of the home already under the hammer. The threat Gideon voiced in a cheap commercial, the demolition, is no longer a boast. It is a wrecking ball in motion. What makes these two episodes rank as high as they do, in this narrator's honest estimation, is how patiently the first one loads the gun, and how brutally the second one shows it firing. Everything is placed before it is paid off. The unnamed favor Bill is owed. The two warnings Dipper reads too late. Stan's faith in his own unbreachable mind. Gideon's plan to replace the shack with his tent. A bat, an elbow, a broom. None of it is filler, and none of it is wasted, and when the shadow finally falls across the shack and the ball meets the sign, you feel the whole season lean forward at once. That is the mark of a finale that has been earned rather than announced, and it is why, of all the places you could stop and measure this series, this is one of the highest. Every so often an episode arrives where a series stops being a good version of itself and becomes something more ambitious. And for many who have watched Gravity Falls closely, Sock Opera is one of the two episodes they point to when they try to explain where the second season shifts into a higher gear. It aired on the 8th of September, 2014, as the fourth episode of Season 2, and it carries an 8.7 out of 10 average from users on IMDb, which places it among the episodes the audience returns to rather than merely remembers. The credits tell you something about the care underneath it. It was directed by Matt Braley and Joe Pitt, with the teleplay and story credited to Shion Takeuchi, Alex Hirsch, and Mark Rizzo. That is a lot of hands on a half hour of television, and the reason becomes clear once you notice that the episode is not one story but two, braided so tightly that neither can move without pulling the other. Consider the shape of it. On one side stands Mabel, who decides to stage a sock puppet rock opera. This is not an idle craft project. She writes it, performs in it, and produces it, and she builds the whole enterprise for a specific reason, to impress a local puppeteer. That target says something about the character. Mabel is a person who makes things in order to reach other people, and here the making has a target, a particular audience of one whose approval she wants. The episode even has a title, which is the sort of detail that tells you how seriously the episode takes her seriousness. It is called Glove Story, a sock opera, and it is credited within the world of the show as written, performed, and produced by Mabel, with Dipper, Candy, and Grenda. So this is a group effort with Mabel at its center, and the presence of the others in the credit is quiet evidence of how much of her orbit she has pulled into this single ambition. On the other side stands Dipper, and his thread runs on a different fuel entirely. Across the episode, his drive to uncover secrets from the journal continues as a central plotline, sitting right alongside the puppet show rather than politely waiting its turn. This is worth pausing on because it is a structural choice, not an accident. Many episodes of many shows give you an A story and a B story that barely touch until a tidy convergence at the end. Here the two threads are load-bearing at the same time. Mabel is building toward a performance, Dipper is digging toward a revelation. The episode lets you feel both engines running, and it lets you sense, the way you sense weather changing, that they are going to meet. And they do meet, though not in the gentle way sibling stories usually resolve. Dipper's pursuit of the journal's secrets leads to a supernatural disaster, and that disaster disrupts Mabel's puppet show. Read the sentence slowly, because the collision is the whole argument of the episode. One twin's hunger for hidden knowledge becomes the thing that breaks the other twin's act of creation. The production Mabel wrote and performed and produced, the one she built to impress someone, is interrupted by the consequences of Dipper reaching for what the journal will not simply hand over. In the earlier videos on this channel, we have looked at Dipper's relationship to the journal mostly through the lens of mystery, of a boy chasing answers in a town that keeps secrets. Here I want to frame it differently. In sock opera, that same curiosity is not presented as heroism or even as harmless enthusiasm. It is presented as a cost, and the person who pays it, at least in part, is his sister. That is a mature idea for a show that still looks, on its surface, like a summer cartoon about two kids and their great uncle. The episode is willing to let its protagonist's defining trait, the thing that makes Dipper Dipper, curdle into the source of the disaster. His drive to know is admirable, and it is dangerous. And sock opera refuses to pretend those are two separate things you can keep apart. The supernatural trouble does not arrive from outside as bad luck. It grows directly out of what he wants and how far he is willing to go to get it. When it lands on Mabel's stage, the show is drawing a line between his private obsession and her public work. And the line is not flattering to him. There is also something clever in setting all of this against a puppet show in particular. Mabel spends the episode animating socks, giving little cloth figures voices and movement and a story to act out. Control is the medium she has chosen, the pleasant control of a performer who decides what each puppet does and says. And the disaster that interrupts her comes out of a very different kind of control, the darker kind the journal's secrets tend to attract in this series. I do not want to overstate what the facts give us. What they give us is the collision itself. The fact that the reaching and the making end up in the same room, and that the reaching wins in the sense that it breaks the making. The episode arranges its two plots so that the ambition of one twin and the curiosity of the other cannot both stand at the same time. You can begin to see why viewers cite this as a turning point. Earlier Gravity Falls could run its A and B stories side by side and let them rhyme. This one makes them consequential to each other, and it does so at the expense of the character we are usually invited to root for. Mabel's rock opera is the most concrete, most personal thing she builds in the episode, complete with a title and a full credit list and a real reason behind it, and the episode lets it be damaged by the very engine that drives the mystery half of the show. That is a story willing to hurt its own protagonist to make a point about them, and to do it without raising its voice, folded inside a plot about sock puppets. Whether this is the single best episode of the season is the kind of question the 8.7 invites and does not settle. What is harder to argue with is that it marks a change in the series' confidence. The number of writers on the story, the two directors, the decision to run two full plots at once and then crash them together. All of it points to a series testing how much weight its structure can hold. In sock opera, the answer turns out to be quite a lot, and the audience, returning to it again and again, seems to agree that the show earned the gear it shifted into here. In Not What He Seems, Gravity Falls does something that most mystery box storytelling refuses to do. It lets you watch the suspect commit the crime. Stan stands at the machine synchronizing a wristwatch timer with a timer on the device itself, and he rigs drums of toxic chemicals to the whole apparatus while stating plainly that he does not care how dangerous it is. Consider the position that puts a viewer in. You have spent a season and a half being taught to trust this man in the small ways that matter, and now you are given, in clear and unhurried detail, every reason to believe he is exactly the villain the agents think he is. The episode is not hiding the evidence, it is handing it to you and daring you to draw the obvious conclusion. That is the reveal structure worth studying here, and it is the opposite of a twist that arrives from nowhere. The writers stack the deck against Stan deliberately. They want the accusation to feel earned, and the single most interesting piece of craft in the whole build is quiet enough that a tired viewer might slide right past it. Stan reads in Journal 1 that a side effect of the machine is temporary gravity anomalies. Watch what that line is doing. It is an explanation planted in plain sight, a rational cause for the strange floating and falling that the episode uses to sell chaos and menace. The show gives you the innocent reading and the guilty reading in the same breath, and it trusts you to reach for the frightening one. Around all of this mechanical dread, there is a scene that the episode almost seems to tuck away. Stan tries to tell Dipper and Mabel his secret while the three of them set off fireworks on the Mystery Shack roof, and he fails. He cannot find the words. Structurally, this is the pressure valve that never opens, the confession that would have changed everything and instead evaporates into the night sky. Think about what that failure costs him. If he had managed it, the entire back half of the episode would collapse, because the tension depends on the twins not knowing what he knows. The scene is not filler, and it is not sentiment for its own sake. It is the writers showing you the door that was available, and then closing it, so that when the accusations come, Stan has no standing to defend himself, and the children have no reason to believe him. Then the ending arrives, and it arrives as an ambush in more than one sense. A heavily armored operator tackles Stan to the ground, and Agent Trigger signals a tactical team to secure the Mystery Shack. Folded into that same beat is a second reveal, smaller but sharp. Agent Powers is alive. The twins had believed he was eaten, and here he is, unharmed and in command. Notice how the episode refuses to give you a clean cliffhanger with a single question mark. It gives you the machine counting down, the man in cuffs, the house full of armed agents, and a supposedly dead figure standing among them. The pacing does not slow to let any one of these land. It piles them, and then it stops. That is how you end a penultimate episode, when you want the audience unable to guess which thread the next chapter will pull first. A Tale of Two Stans answers by refusing to answer directly. It opens not with the machine or the agents, but with a cold open flashback, two unnamed boys breaking into a boarded-up camp. The episode withholds who they are until the scene itself reveals them to be young Stanley and Stanford Pines. This is a deliberate act of misdirection through intimacy. You are watching childhood before you have any frame for whose childhood it is, and by the time the names resolve, the episode has already earned a little of your tenderness for two kids in a cave. That is a very different opening gambit from the one before it, where not what he seems front-loaded threat, its sequel front-loads warmth, and it does so precisely because it is about to complicate every warm feeling you have. The continuity between the two episodes is almost aggressive in how tightly it snaps together. The sequel picks up directly where the last one left off, and the first thing the Freedman does is punch Stan. Not thank him, punch him. Weigh that inversion for a moment. Stan has spent 30 years and, as we just saw, a countdown of toxic and dangerous rigging to bring this person back, and the reunion is a fist. The episode is signaling immediately that the story you assumed, the rescue, the debt repaid, is not the story you are going to get. The emotional math is wrong, and the wrongness is the hook. The name reveal is handled with real economy, and it is worth watching how casually the episode drops the thing the whole series has been circling. Dipper and Mabel ask why the author called Stan Stanley, and that question prompts Ford to ask whether Stan took his name. The identity of the author, the figure the mystery has been built around, is not delivered as a thunderclap. It falls out of a child's confusion over a single word. The author is named Stanford, not Stanley, and the episode lets that land through the children's ordinary curiosity rather than through any grand announcement. There is a lesson in that restraint. The bigger the secret, the less the writing needs to shout it. What I find most elegant is the frame the episode chooses for its own backstory. Mabel asks Stan and Ford to tell the story aloud, to pass the time while Powers and Trigger's agents search the shack above them. The entire flashback exists inside that request. This is not idle structure. It solves a real problem, because a full origin dump would ordinarily stall a season's momentum dead, and instead the show wraps the exposition inside live jeopardy. Agents are overhead. The clock has not stopped. The story of the past is being told in a basement under a house being searched, which means every minute of flashback is also a minute of present tension. The pacing never fully releases even while it reaches decades backward. And the payload of that flashback, the thing the whole two-part structure has been building toward, is a redefinition of what a betrayal even is. The pivotal wound between the brothers is revealed to be an accident. Stanley slams his fist on a table in frustration and unintentionally destroys Stanford's perpetual motion machine the night before a college admissions team is to inspect it. Look at how much the writing refuses to make this simple. There is no villainy in the gesture, only frustration and terrible timing. A moment of temper, a fragile machine, a deadline, and a life redirected in a heartbeat. The story has spent 2 episodes teaching you to read Stan as the one who did something unforgivable, and when it finally shows you the original sin, it turns out to be the kind of thing that could happen to anyone who ever knocked something over in anger. That is the craft achievement of these 2 episodes taken together. The first spends its energy convincing you that Stan is guilty in the largest way, and the second reveals that the guilt at the foundation of everything is small, accidental, and human. The reveal structure moves you from certainty to sympathy without ever cheating, because every step, the synchronized timers, the failed rooftop confession, the punch, the child's question about a name, the fist on the table, was placed exactly where it needed to be. Some craft hides itself, and the opening of the 37th episode of Gravity Falls is built almost entirely out of it. Consider how the story chooses to begin. Not with a monster, not with a portal, not with the machinery of the larger plot that the series has been assembling for 2 seasons. It begins with Mabel waking Dipper up in the attic bedroom of the Mystery Shack, and it begins with a joke. The joke is small and deliberately childish. Mabel has stuck a pair of googly eyes to her chin and is speaking in a character voice she calls Mr. Upside-Downington. If you have ever watched a younger sibling perform a bit they invented years ago, you understand the register the show is reaching for here. It is silly. It is affectionate. It is the sort of thing that only works between 2 people who have known each other their whole lives. And Dipper, still half awake, does the thing that older brothers do. He points out, in effect, that Mabel has not done the Mr. Upside-Downington bit since 3rd grade. Think about what that single line is really doing. It is not there to be funny, though it is funny. It is there to plant a flag in time. By reaching back to 3rd grade, the episode tells you that this bit is old, that it belongs to a shared childhood, that the 2 of them carry a private history of voices and games that stretches back years before the summer we have been watching. The writers could have opened on almost anything. They opened on a piece of the twins' past resurfacing in the present, and they let Dipper name exactly how long it has been sleeping. Then the episode does the thing that makes it, for my money, one of the most quietly devastating setups in the entire series. Mabel reminds Dipper that their 13th birthday is exactly 1 week away, and she has to remind him, because he had barely registered it. Stay with that detail for a moment, because the writing lives inside it. Dipper, the character who documents everything, who fills journals and chases mysteries and keeps track of every strange thing in this town, has lost track of the one date that should matter most to a child. His own birthday. The summer has swallowed it, and the show does not underline this with a speech or a swell of music in this opening beat. It simply lets a boy be surprised that time has moved while he was not looking, and it trusts you to feel the small, cold thing that surprise contains. The stakes being built here are not the stakes of the supernatural plot. They are the stakes of a calendar. The twins' 13th birthday is the 31st of August, and the 31st of August is the last day of summer. So the countdown that this episode starts is not a countdown to a battle. It is a countdown to an ending that no amount of cleverness can outmaneuver. 1 week, 7 days, and then the summer, the thing this entire show has been, is simply over. This is stakes building of a rarer kind than the genre usually attempts. An adventure story most often raises tension by making a threat larger, a monster stronger, a villain closer. What this episode does instead is make time smaller. It takes the loose, endless feeling summer that the series has lived inside and it puts a wall at the end of it. And it does so with a chin full of googly eyes and a joke from 3rd grade. The threat is not that something terrible will arrive. The threat is that something wonderful will leave. And the reason it works, the reason it earns its place so high when you rank these pre-finale episodes on the writing itself, is the ordering. The episode gives you the childhood bit first. It lets Mr. Upside-Downington be genuinely, warmly silly before it tells you that the childhood which produced him is running out of days. You laugh, and then the ground shifts under the laugh. That is a writer's choice, and a patient one. A weaker script would have led with the birthday, with the dread, and asked the comedy to lighten it afterward. This episode does the opposite. It lets you love the thing first and grieve it second, in the space of a single scene in an attic. There is a production fact worth holding alongside all of this. Dipper and Mabel vs. the Future first aired on Disney XD on the 12th of October, 2015, and it sits as the 17th entry in Season 2. By this point, the series knew where it was going and how little time it had left to get there. An opening built on a one-week countdown is not an accident from a show in that position. It is a series looking at its own ending and choosing, before anything else happens, to make you feel the clock. So when the twins finally get out of bed and the episode proper begins, you already carry the weight it wanted you to carry. 7 days. A birthday its owner almost forgot. A childhood voice pulled out of storage one last time. The craft is in how gently all of it was placed, and in how much it will come to mean. There is a way to measure a television show that has nothing to do with taste, and it is worth sitting with for a moment before the numbers are spoken. When a large number of ordinary viewers rate every episode of a series independently, over years, without coordinating, a shape emerges. Not an opinion, a consensus. And when that consensus points at 3 consecutive episodes and calls them the summit, the pattern is no longer something a single critic can argue away. Gravity Falls ends with a 3-part finale, and by the plainest measure available, those 3 parts are the finest work the show ever produced. Consider what the finale is actually made of before considering how it ranks. In the first part, Weirdmageddon Part 1, Bill Cipher returns to take down the Pines family, and he does not come alone. He brings allies of his own with him. That single detail reframes everything the series had been building toward, because a villain who arrives with reinforcements is a villain who has been planning, who treats this family as an obstacle worth overwhelming rather than a nuisance to swat aside. The threat is no longer personal in the small sense. It has become an occupation. By the third part, Weirdmageddon 3, Take Back the Falls, the story turns inward before it turns final. Ford discovers Bill Cipher's true motives. Think about what that placement means. The revelation of what Bill actually wants does not arrive at the beginning as a setup, and it does not arrive in the middle as a complication. It arrives near the end in the mind of the character who has spent the longest chasing this being, which means the audience learns the truth at almost the same moment as the person best equipped to understand it. And then the final confrontation with Bill leads to the Pines family's ultimate fate and their greatest sacrifice. The word sacrifice is the one to hold on to. A finale can resolve a plot without costing anything. This one does not resolve without cost. Now the numbers, spoken slowly because they are the reason this chapter exists. The finale holds an average of 9.8 on IMDb. That figure ties it with Not What He Seems as the highest rated episode of the entire series. 2 episodes stand at the very top, and the finale is one of them. There is a quiet symmetry in the pairing that rewards a moment of thought. Not What He Seems was the episode that shattered the audience's understanding of who the Pines family even was. The great mid-series turn. The finale sits beside it at the same height. The show reached its peak twice, once when it broke the story open and once when it closed the story down, and the crowd rates those 2 moments as equals. The other 2 parts of the finale do not trail far behind. Weirdmageddon Part 1 holds a 9.5, which places it as the 4th highest rated episode of the series. Weirdmageddon 2, Escape from Reality, sits at 9.3, ranking it 5th. Set those beside the finale and a rare thing becomes visible. All 3 parts of the ending place among the series' 10 highest-rated episodes, and the last of them ranks first. Most series, even beloved ones, spread their best episodes across their run. A strong pilot here, a bottle episode there, a mid-season shock, a moment of grace late. Gravity Falls did something different. It concentrated its highest points at the very end and delivered them consecutively. That concentration is worth taking seriously as a claim about how the show was built, and here the narrator will step forward with an opinion, clearly marked as opinion. A finale that rates this way is not an accident of goodwill. Audiences are generous to endings in the moment and less generous once the feeling fades and they sit down to rate an episode against everything that came before it. For 3 episodes in a row to survive that colder second look, and for the last of them to end up rated above every other episode of the series, the ending had to earn its standing on craft, not on sentiment alone. The facts point at a show that knew exactly where it was going and saved its strongest material for the arrival. Rank the three parts against each other and a gentle ascent appears. The middle chapter, Escape from Reality, sits lowest of the three at 5th overall, which is still extraordinary company. The opening chapter climbs above it to 4th, and the closing chapter rises above both to the top of the entire series. The finale does not sag in the middle and recover, the way long endings often do. It builds. Each part is rated more highly than a great many episodes Gravity Falls ever made, and the trajectory across the three moves upward toward the conclusion. If you were designing an ending on paper and wanted the shape of it to feel like a rising line, this is the shape you would draw. Set the whole finale against the rest of the series now, which is the question this chapter was made to answer. The show has many strong episodes. It has that mid-series turn, Not What He Seems, standing at the very peak. But when the three parts of Weirdmageddon are placed on the same board as everything else, 3 of the 10 best episodes the series ever produced belong to the ending, and the single best belongs to it as well. No other stretch of the series holds that much of the summit at once. The Mystery of the Week episodes, the character studies, the summer idols, all of them are the foundation. The finale is where the building actually reaches its height. So the answer, by the only measure that removes the narrator's own preference from the equation, is not close. The 3-part finale is the highest point of Gravity Falls. Its last chapter is the highest single point of all, tied only with the episode that first taught the audience how much this family was hiding. 2 peaks, one near the middle and one at the very end, and between them the show told everything it had to tell. There is a version of every countdown that runs on feeling alone, on the private conviction that a certain hour of television mattered more than the rest. This chapter does something quieter. It sets the feeling beside the numbers and asks whether the two agree. Gravity Falls ran for 40 episodes, split evenly into 2 seasons of 20, and it aired across a stretch of years that began in the summer of 2012 and closed in the winter of 2016. That is the whole shape of it. 40 chapters of story, and then nothing more by design. What the ratings reveal, when you lay them end to end, is a show that did not peak early and coast. It climbed. If you take the audience scores gathered on IMDb, the crowd of thousands who logged their verdict episode by episode, the highest points on the graph cluster almost entirely in the back half of Season 2. Dwell on that for a moment. A series that could have run out of ideas, that could have thinned as it went, instead saved its most admired hours for the end. 2 episodes sit at the very top, tied, each carrying a score of 9.8. One of them is the series finale, the 20th and last episode of Season 2. The other is Not What He Seems, the 11th episode of that same season. The pairing is worth sitting with. A finale earning the highest possible affection from an audience is common enough, because a finale carries the weight of everything before it, and people grade the ending generously. What is stranger, and more telling, is that an episode from the middle of the season reaches the exact same height. Not What He Seems is not a conclusion. It is a hinge, and the crowd rated it as though it were as essential as the last word. I have my own opinion about why that is, and I offer it as opinion. An audience remembers the moment a story stops being the thing they thought it was. Not What He Seems is that kind of episode, the one where the ground shifts and the numbers suggest the shift landed. It does not need to be the ending to be treated like one. It is the place where the show earns the trust it spends later. Directly after it, in the running order, comes the 12th episode of Season 2, The Origin Tale of the Two Stands, rated 9.6. That is the 3rd highest score in the entire series, and its position is not an accident. It follows the hinge. Where the previous episode breaks something open, this one explains the pieces. The audience rewarded the reveal and then rewarded the reckoning with it. Back to back, 1st and 3rd on the whole list. You can read the shape of a well-built story just from those 2 rankings sitting next to each other. One a question and one an answer, both near the top. Then there is the Weirdmageddon stretch, the long finale movement that closes the series. Its first part, listed as Weirdmageddon Part 1, the 18th episode of Season 2, carries a 9.5. Its final part, the true ending, reaches 9.8 and shares the crown. What sits between them is the 17th episode of Season 2, Dipper and Mabel vs. the Future, rated 9.3. That episode is the calm before the storm, the last ordinary hour before everything comes apart, and the audience placed it high all the same. It is not the spectacle. It is the setup for the spectacle. And still it holds a score most shows would envy for their best. That same figure, 9.3, belongs to one more episode, and this one reaches back across the whole run to Season 1. Gideon Rises, the 20th and final installment of Season 1, closes that year of the series at 9.3, level with the quiet hour before the last battle. Consider the symmetry there. The finale of Season 1 and one of the final episodes of Season 2, separated by dozens of installments and years of real time, arriving at the same number. It suggests the show knew how to end a movement. Whether it was closing a single season or the entire series, it landed its finales in the same high register. If you step back from the individual titles and look only at the pattern, a clear picture forms. The peaks are not scattered evenly. They gather at the seams, at the finales and the reveals and the turns. And they gather most densely at the end. The two perfect near tens both come from Season 2. The third place episode comes from Season 2. Several of the 6 highest-rated hours belong to that final Weirdmageddon and Stan stretch of the second season. The audience, in other words, felt the show getting better as it went, and they recorded that feeling one number at a time. There is a modesty to grounding a countdown in figures like these. A ranking built on taste alone can be argued with forever. A ranking that agrees with the audience score, that finds the same episodes rising to the top when thousands of strangers vote independently, carries a different kind of weight. It does not prove that these are the best episodes. Nothing proves that. But it does show that the affection is shared, that the hours which feel monumental to one viewer register as monumental to the crowd as well. So when the rest of this series places certain episodes near the summit, know that the numbers are standing there too. The finale and the hinge, tied at the highest point. The reveal and the reckoning, first and third. The long ending, climbing from 9.5 to a perfect near 10. With the quiet episode before it holding steady alongside the close of Season 1. 40 episodes, and the crowd told us, without being asked to agree, exactly where the ground rose. The story we are counting down and the record the audience left behind describe the same mountain. There is a strange comfort in the way a fan base cannot agree on its own worst episode. Every long-running show accumulates a list of supposed low points, and Gravity Falls is no different, except that its arguments never quite resolve. Ask a room of viewers which episode is the weakest, and you will get several confident answers, each defended with real evidence, none of them able to fully defeat the others. What makes the disagreement interesting is not that people are wrong, it is that they are measuring different things and calling the result by the same name. If you set the arguments aside and look only at the aggregate numbers, one answer does surface. According to IMDb user ratings, the lowest rated episode of the entire series is Boys Crazy, from the first season, sitting somewhere around 7.2 or 7.3 out of 10. That is well below the series' usual standard, low enough to stand out on any chart of the episodes in order. And yet very few fans, if you ask them casually, would name it first. The crowd has quietly voted it down, but the conversation has drifted elsewhere. Consider what that gap means. A rating is a silent verdict, cast by thousands who never explain themselves, while a fan argument is loud and specific and driven by the episodes people actually feel strongly about. Most of that feeling collects around the second season, and around one episode in particular. Roadside Attraction is the one fans and reviewers return to again and again when they want to point at a genuine misstep. Part of that is placement. It is the last standalone episode before the series turns fully toward its finale arc, the final breath of ordinary adventure before the ending begins, and that position works against it. Surrounded by episodes building toward something enormous, a piece of writing that is merely uneven looks worse than it would in isolation. The criticism most often leveled at it is exactly that the writing is spotty, that it does not hold together the way the episodes around it do. But the deeper complaint is not about craft. It is about the moral. The episode wants to say something about romance, that you cannot force another person to love you, which is a reasonable and even gentle idea for the show to explore. The problem, as many fans read it, is that the episode undermines its own lesson. Dipper does not return Candy's feelings, and the story treats him as though he has done something wrong by not returning them. Think about what that asks of the moral. If the point is that love cannot be forced, then a boy who simply does not feel the same way is the one person the moral should protect. and instead he is cast as the one at fault. The discomfort sharpens when you notice who is delivering the criticism inside the story. It is Mabel who takes Dipper to task for not loving Candy back, and Mabel is the character who once stood on the other side of that exact situation with Gideon, unwanted by someone she did not want in return. The audience remembers that, so when she scolds her brother for a feeling she herself was allowed to have, the episode's argument seems to fold in on itself, and a lesson that might have landed cleanly instead leaves viewers arguing about whether the episode even understood its own point. There is a quieter, more constructive strand of that argument too, one that treats the episode less as a failure and more as a missed opportunity. Some fans have suggested that the whole thing would have worked better if the crush had belonged not to Candy, a relatively minor character, but to Pacifica. The idea has a certain logic. Northwest Mansion Mystery had already set up a real charge between Dipper and Pacifica, a tension the writers seemed interested in, and building on that existing thread would have given the romance actual weight, rather than inventing feeling from a character the audience had little investment in. It is worth sitting with that as a lesson about storytelling in general. The material for a stronger episode was already present in the season, unused. Roadside Attraction is not alone in drawing this kind of scrutiny. The Love God earlier in the same season carries one of the lower ratings of Season 2, somewhere near 7.8 or 7.9, and the complaint against it rhymes with the complaint against the other. Here the episode preaches against romantic manipulation, against the idea of engineering other people's feelings, and yet the story has Mabel doing precisely that, arranging and interfering with relationships that are not hers to arrange. 2 episodes, 1 season, the same fracture between what the show says and what it shows. Set against all of this is the one point the fanbase does agree on. Not What He Seems, from the 2nd season, holds the highest IMDb rating of any episode in the series, near 9.8, and its position at the top is remarkably stable. The disputes over the worst episode never truly settle, precisely because worst is a word people define differently, by rating or by writing or by broken morals. Best, for once, is easier. When an episode is doing everything at full strength, the disagreement simply falls away. There is a reason this show holds up to the kind of attention we have given it here. Gravity Falls was built to be watched twice, once for the mystery and once for the grief hiding underneath it, and every ranking we have made is really an argument about how those two things sit together. The episodes near the top are not simply the funniest or the most frightening. They are the ones where a joke and a wound arrive in the same moment, where a town of cryptids and vending machine doors turns out to be a place about growing up and being left, about a brother you almost lost, and a summer you cannot keep. To rank them is to admit that the show knew exactly what it was doing, that the strangeness was always in service of something tender, and that the ending was written into the first frame. So the order matters less now than the shape it traces. A single season, then another, and a story that closes on purpose while so many others simply stop. And when you set all of it down and step back, what remains is not a list at all. It is a golf cart on a dirt road at dusk, 2 kids in the back, the pines going dark and blue behind them, the town growing small, and the light still holding just long enough to see them go. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.